Okay, welcome back, Council. I just wanted to take a moment for a territorial acknowledgement. Later this week, if memory serves me correct, on the 21st, it will actually be Indigenous Peoples' Day. So we're just a few days ahead of that. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather, land on which we are broadcasting from, is the land traditionally cared for by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. I'd like to take a moment of reflection. At the beginning of this council meeting, we pause to think about the needs of our community. May we show wisdom and compassion in all of our decisions. Council, disclosure pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof. Seeing none from my colleagues, I will declare that I have a conflict with regard to the two informal meetings that are on the agenda for this evening. I'm very thankful to the Clerk's Department for making arrangements for us to seek legal advice on conflicts, and I'm going to be seeking that option to see if I can declare fewer of these, but this is related to my place of employment. Consent motion. So there are items A through B, Council, and I'm just checking in with my Clerk's Department. The delegation is not, is it the delegation related to a consent item? Yeah, so may I have someone from council to pull consent item B? Yeah, thank you. So we'll pull consent item 6B. And is there any other items that council would like pulled? I guess there's just one other one in there. So seeing none, do I have a mover for 6A? Moved by Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Vasic. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So we'll deal with item 6B at this point. This item removed from the consent agenda. It's the Green Building Policy Implementation 2023 funding release. And we have a delegation, Kay Egley. Welcome, Kay. It's always nice to see you.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm being very opportunistic here. You see, I'm identifying myself as a member of Green WR, which is an organization that's trying to promote green development standards, and particularly their implementation as quickly as possible. And so I saw this report. Remember how to do this. Page up. No. What do I, mouse? How do
Maybe
I move
just
my slide?
the down arrow.
The down arrow. Okay.
Well, that worked.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. So I noted in the report that Anna Ristic did to council, and I think it was April, about your corporate climate action plan and your targets of 50% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. And I reflected on this, the region of Waterloo targets, and where Waterloo fits into this, because the target, as we know, was 30% below the 2010 emissions. And so our group has been doing some little calculations to see, do we have a chance of meeting these targets? And so these are some kind of back of the envelope calculations we did. So we looked at regional emissions in 2010 were 4.5 million tons. And if we take it, what should our 2030 target be? It should be just over 3 million tons. And so if we were to actually meet this target, we would have to reduce 71,000 tons a year. So how are we doing? When you look at the Climate Action Inventory Report for the City of Waterloo, it said that the 2010 emissions worked out to 8.4 tons of carbon dioxide per person, or 4.6 million tons in total. So if you look at, where's Waterloo's share in that? So our population in 2010 was 98,780. And our emissions were 144 tons of carbon dioxide. So therefore, our target, our emission reduction target, we would want to be reducing 142,000 tons. But in fact, this is what Anna's report said. For the city, we did 1,882 tons versus 141,000. So there's a long way to go. And of course, this is just the city. This is not what the city's spending, and that's what your report today is. It's about the budget. This report was to approve the spending of this budget that was in here. My circle moved up on me. It should be the 526,000. So you're going ahead with the city plan, but it's not bringing us near our target, which is 141,000 tons, and we're doing 18,000. So I feel we really need to be looking at carbon budgeting as well as financial budgeting. And carbon budgeting is a term I came across. You may have heard of it before, but basically if you look at how many emissions the planet can still emit before we get to the point of no return, and then you take that number and divide it by every municipality in the world on a population basis, you come down to a number, and that's the budget. So that was that budget earlier that was mentioned. Walter Feedy did the analysis for the Climate Action WR report a few years ago. And so, and that, if we had this kind of a carbon budget, like how much more carbon can we spend before it's a point of no return? And we use that to analyze every project, it would be great. Because here, I mean, today this report was looking at how you're going to reduce things and the operation of the buildings, which is great. But, you know, every time we approve a demolition permit, that's some more carbon emissions. Tonight you have some proposals that will build some other buildings. That's a lot of emissions that will do. Now on a per capita basis, and if those buildings are efficient, that's good. But the point is, every one of these decisions puts emissions into the air. So how are we going to offset that? And, you know, I mean, and this would be like a long-term budget. It's not like a one-year budget I'm talking about here, because you do have to look at, like I know last month in Committee of Adjustment, we looked at, and it wasn't our thing to approve the demolition permit, but the issue was there was a demolition permit of a perfectly good home to be replaced by another perfectly good home. You know, but there's emissions from the demolition and there's emissions to build it. Now, if this new home is housing 8 people and the old one was 1 and the old one was really drafty and it didn't operate efficiently, we might be offsetting it. But that's the kind of thing I feel we need to be doing. And I know it's complicated and I know it's hard. There is some good news. There's a tool that's been developed in the United States, the CARE tool called Carbon Avoided Retrofit Estimator. And that allows you to look at buildings and make some of those decisions about retrofitting, replacing, and so on. But the point is we need the budget and we need to start measuring it. And the other good news is that at least Edmonton is doing this. I think there are other cities, I think Vancouver's done it, but I know Edmonton has done this. So this is my message for today, very opportunistically, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Kay. We have been talking about carbon budgeting around the table and behind the scenes as part of our financial budget process. So appreciate your presentation, and hopefully that it's something that our finance staff can take away to think about, because the mayor's certainly asked about it. And so we're trying to give consideration of what that looks like and how it fits in. So thank you for that.
Well,
Yep.
Let me know. And let Green WR know. We're very interested.
All good things take time, but
I know.
It's not lost on us. So there's a couple questions here. I see the mayor, and then I see Councillor Bodley.
Yeah, thank you through you, Chair, and thank you very much, Kay, for bringing this. It's not opportunistic at all. It's welcome. Delegations and citizen engagement like you regularly provide is really welcome. So thank you. I just wanted to note, like Councillor Freeman said, we have been starting to talk about that with our Commissioner of Financial Services, and so they are doing some look into it. It is kind of like everything, it is quite complex. But I just wanted to add, we were meeting with the CAO, Tim and I met with Conestoga College last week, and they were sharing that they have been accredited, and I should look this up, but they've been accredited recently as the only institution in Canada with carbon literacy, and they have a it's it's a worldwide accreditation that they recently received. So they are starting to offer microcredits in carbon literacy. I think the microcredits are 4 to 6 weeks long. So there's some work that's happening at our local college system to assist, certainly the city in better understanding the carbon in what we do and carbon budgeting and that, but certainly available to help individuals as well as organizations of any type to understand carbon and what they're contributing and how to reduce and avoid and things like that. So.
Well, that's excellent. I'll definitely follow up with you and Tim to find out who you were talking to, and definitely people we want to be in touch with as well. Thank you.
And Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through your Chair Freeman. Thanks, Kate. I have a question for you about the carbon budgeting, what you are envisioning, and perhaps what Green WR is envisioning, if you feel comfortable speaking on their behalf. So back in 2019, when councils across the region were sort of being delegated to about climate emergency declarations and the concept of carbon budgeting, I don't really recall that the scope of that conversation was community based. That in the example that you provided about a house being a demolition occurring, what the embodied carbon of the construction would be, and all of the other things associated with that. My recollection of that was that this was going to be completely internally focused from a carbon budgeting perspective, so corporately focused carbon budgeting. And it strikes me that what you're alluding to would be, I know in talking to Enna and some of the other sustainability folks in the city, how complicated it is for us to even consider carbon budgeting through just a corporate lens. And it would strike me that looking at carbon budgeting through a community lens, totally understanding that the city of Waterloo obviously has a role to play when it comes to community scoped emissions. But it would strike me that carbon budgeting for that would be quite impossible, frankly. And so I'm curious if Edmonton or Vancouver or any of these other cities that have sort of trailblazed here are looking at it through that lens, or if that is left to folks like Climate Action WR and other community focused efforts.
Yeah, it's been a couple of years since I looked at Edmonton, but I'm pretty sure it was a citywide carbon budget. And you're right. I mean, to do it for the whole city, which is what, in my opinion, we really need to be doing, it's pretty hard to imagine how to do. I can certainly imagine policies that would get us there. And I'm not sure what Vancouver has done about this either, but or other jurisdictions. But I'll look into that some more. But you're right. But the Edmonton one, it was a citywide, and that's a good step, because that's the things you can control the most. But I will stress, if we had policies that encouraged that in our development and our demolition, and our engineering decisions, that citywide for the people, not just the city, that would be fantastic. Okay.
Thank you. Council, any other questions for the delegation? Thank you. Thanks so much, Kay. So we have a recommendation, Council, for your consideration. Do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Vasic, seconded by Councillor Bodley. All those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. So we're moving on to staff report. Staff report 8A is our debt policy update, and there's a presentation from Kim Regier. Welcome, Kim.
Hello. Okay, great. Perfect. Okay. Good afternoon, Council, senior management team, and members of the general public. We're going to be taking a look at
Excuse me, Kim, sorry. Can I just trouble you to raise the podium and just speak a little bit closer to the microphone? I know I'm having a little trouble hearing you, so that would be just great. Thank you so much.
No problem. So we'll be taking a look at the debt policy revision, and we'll take a look at context, and then the major parts of the policy that we'll we're looking to revise, such as a debt limit per project, amortization period of debentures, debt application, including enterprises in the debt policy, and external versus internal borrowing. And then at the end, I'll put up the report recommendations for your consideration. Okay, context. So the debt policy FC 009 had its last major update in 2009, and they had a minor update in 2019. The policy update will give the city more financial flexibility and lower its administrative costs without increasing risk materially, this current update. And then changes proposed are consistent with other local municipalities. Okay, so moving on to the policy revision items. The first one that we'd want to take a look at is removing the per capital project debt limit of 30%. There's really no benefit to managing debt on a per project basis. We manage it at an aggregate level. So managing it on a per project basis doesn't reduce our risk. It only increases our administrative burden because we have more invoices to pay. We have to manage more projects that have the debt. So it doesn't really have a value added component. The way the city does control its debt is two ways. We have an annual repayment limit, which is 25% of net operating revenues. And we also have the total annual net debt charges will not exceed the annual contribution to the CRF, CARF, or CURF. So those are what control our debt, not limiting debt per project. Moving on to the next item. We're proposing the next one is the amortization period be increased to 20 years versus the standard 10-year maximum. And we would only propose this in instances where the underlying lifespan of an asset, such as a building, is greater than the extended amortization period. So the most obvious example here would be a building has usually have a lifespan of between 30 to 50 years. So amortizing the building over 20 years is not going to put us underwater. It would be a reasonable thing to do. We'd also have to take into consideration that the additional interest expense is also justified over the longer period of time, even though your month or your yearly payments would be lower every year. Since you're paying over a longer period, your total interest would be more. And this would also require the approval of the CFO, the program area commissioner, and would be subject to council approval. So it would be under great consideration that this would be applied. Next slide is debt application. And what I mean about that is the current financial policy is silent as to whether debt should be only used for exclusively new assets versus rehabilitation or both. MFOA has proposed a rationale of using debt only for new projects to prevent municipalities trying to leverage themselves out of infrastructure deficits. And the city realizes that debt does not create more money. It just allows the municipality to reprioritize projects along the capital planning horizon. So this is what informs the city's capital planning strategy. So therefore, we're proposing the use of debt for strategic priorities, including but not limited to infrastructure renewal projects, climate action projects, and any other strategic initiatives subject to council approval. The next change we're proposing is to bring enterprises into the debt policy because currently they're not included. Enterprise debt is already included in the annual repayment limit calculation, so bringing it into it will not change that. Net debt charges are zero for enterprises, as all charges are recoverable. So in the little diagram there, you see net debt charges are zero. And the contributions will always be more than the net debt charges because of that reason. And this is consistent how we do the tax base, where annual net debt charges will not exceed the annual budget contribution to CRF, CARF, and CURF. So it's very similar. Okay, and the next one we're looking at is external versus internal borrowing. So right now, we're a lower tier municipality, and we do not have the power to issue debt on our own. We have to go to the region and get them to issue it on our behalf. There are administrative costs involved in that. There are legal costs and administrative costs between $39,000 to $54,000 on just a $5 million debenture. So it does get pretty expensive. What we're proposing for internal debt or interreserve borrowing is not really debt. We're just borrowing from other, setting up a project to carry a debt, and we're paying it off from contributions from CURF, CRF, or CARF. This is consistent with other municipality practices and has been verified by legal as not to infringe upon the municipal act that we cannot issue debt, because it's not really debt, it's interreserve borrowing. So some of the benefits of internal borrowing is there are no external administrative costs that we have to pay. The timing is more flexible. We don't have to meet the region's debt issuance windows in spring and fall. There's lower interest costs, and the debt ratios remain unaffected. Now, the most important takeaway from this slide is that internal and external borrowing are not to be deemed mutually exclusive. They should be complementary to each other, and the city does intend on using external debt now and in the future. There is definitely a use for it, and also to supplement that with internal borrowing. The status of the council-approved internal debt as a monitoring measure would be included in the reserve and reserve fund report. So that would increase the profile of that so we can keep track of our internal borrowings. And also the internal reserve borrowing will not affect the debt ratios or the annual repayment limit calculation. So the internal debt issue process is outlined in the report. It has to be declared in the budget, just like all debt does. And projects requiring internal debt will be flagged as non-routine, and so we would have to come back to council and get permission to go forward with that internal debt. So the limit of internal debt is set at 10 million, and this is supported by the minimum cash balances outlined in the report in Appendix A. And principal and interest payments would be funded with enterprise debt for enterprises, and CARF, CRF, and CURF would be for tax-based projects. And the accounting treatment is outlined in the report on pages 15 and 16. So I'm just going to put up the, an audit committee review. We had presented this to the audit committee, and they fully endorsed all the recommendations that we presented to you here today. And so those are the report recommendations, and I'd be happy to take any of your questions at this time.
Great, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm looking to council for questions. Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through you, Chair Freeman. Really appreciate the presentation. I would like to understand there's some discussion in there about leveraging new debt for infrastructure needs, strategic initiatives, and climate mitigation projects. And with infrastructure needs and likely with strategic initiatives, the debt that's being issued is for capital projects that is likely not going to see any sort of operational benefit to the city. Whereas with climate mitigation, when we are issuing new debt to improve the building efficiency of Rim Park, for example, there's an operational benefit that comes from that. And I'm wondering how that is being built into our debt policies, in the sense of where that money goes to. Is that operating sort of getting paid back right into the facility that's running it? Or is there any way that the operational savings of lowered energy costs could be put towards the debt to perhaps justify doing more capital projects for these reasons?
Through you, Chair. That's a very good question. Climate or GHG emission reduction projects sometimes result in savings and sometimes they don't. simply because the technology that's replacing the old technology has costs of its own. So the main goal here is to reduce GHG emissions, not to generate savings, although that's great as well. And obviously, if there were material savings, we would try to capture those and certainly take a look at putting that towards CARF as a funding source. But savings are not guaranteed from these projects, just as I just said. So it's something that we're looking at and we keep an eye on, and certainly we want climate action and GHG reduction type technologies to pay off in that way. But the most important thing is the reduction of pollution. You're welcome.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I just want to build on Royce's comment there, Councillor Bodley's comment. So in the process of putting together, what is a strategic priority, and that would be the bar for doing this kind of debt financing, would we not want to prioritize community benefit stacking, like in terms of, being able to see, aggregate outcomes from a project?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
The question is really about, the bar that we have for establishing what is a strategic priority when we're taking on debt.
Right. A definition of a strategic project has not been defined as such. However, through budget deliberations and senior management, they take into consideration everything that's being proffered, and at that time, depending on the community's needs, determine which projects meet strategic initiatives and which don't. So one of them obviously is climate change or GHG reduction. So that's one of the major things that we'd want to move up the timeline, because remember, debt is not creating more money. It's just simply moving projects up the timeline so we can do more in the present than in the future. So I think that's like the major consideration. What can't wait? What do we need to do now? And I think the most important thing would be GHG emissions. But these conversations happen on a continuous basis about what our needs are and ever changing, and what are priorities, that are out in the community. So it's really a senior management decision through discussion, through budget deliberations, to come up with a strategic priority. But you're right, you would want to pick projects that have synergistic effects where the sum of the parts are greater than what you put in, and we all want that, and that would definitely go into the consideration.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Mayor McCabe, yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, I was just waiting to see if anyone else had a question. Thanks very much, Kim, for the report. I just wondered, and I very much support this direction. Absolutely. I just was wondering with the province looking at municipalities' reserves, and I think maybe in some cases misunderstanding why our reserves are there and what we're going to do with them. Do any of these changes that you're suggesting, would the province potentially misinterpret what we're trying to do with this? Is there any danger sort of that with a potential change direction?
Personally, I don't think this is misleading at all, unless the government would try to find it misleading. So I think this is very clear, and I don't think it's by doing internal boring, because many other municipalities do it.
Yeah.
So I don't think that would.
I just was concerned because the province has made some statements about municipalities have all this money and it's in reserve. And so if we just to make sure they understand that what we have in reserve is actually it's accounted for, it's being set aside for strategic initiatives and projects, and this isn't going to kind of convolute their thinking around it.
Brad Witzel here will be able to answer that question more fulsome than I can. Go ahead.
Through you, Chair. It's a very good question, Mayor. Is that perception is out there, at least within the province, And so if you're looking at the reserves that we're noting to potentially backstop into reserve borrowing, upwards of $18 million is their minimum balance. Yeah, $18 million is a lot of money, but it isn't really a lot of money in the context of a city our size. So we have to keep that in mind. So we're talking, $100 million annual capital budget. We're approaching $100 million net annual budget. So we have to keep the scale and size. What Kim and the team is proposing here is, for debentures of up to $10 million. So that's important. We're talking about small amounts of debenture financing in reality, that there is potential opportunity for us to look at doing that differently through inter-reserve borrowing for smaller issuances. So we're looking at it from strategic lenses. The debt through the region is a very good process, and we're going to continue to rely on that external debt. But it does have some administrative challenges that Kim's noted, and also has limited flexibility, as we need to do it through set fall and spring issuances. And so having the ability to, at times, fund things internally through other reserves will provide us a lot of flexibility. And these reserves that we're relying on, they do have council-approved minimum balances, and they do have outlined uses. And so we're going to continue to rely on that, and we're just kind of borrowing from them over time. So that's what I would offer in terms of, how we would justify it in the context. And, at the end of the day, small amount of money considering the context of the city overall. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I've just kind of editorialized to Councillor Wright's comment about the strategic initiatives. I'm going to assume that they'll follow when we have our strategic plan finalized next week, that those will align. The strategic initiatives that we would use in this case would align with our strategic plan.
Yeah, I would certainly hope so. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I could just add to that, the strategic initiative piece is a bit of flexibility for council. So we didn't want to create a policy that became restrictive, and then there was an opportunity that had come forward that council wanted to support, and debenture was potentially, whether it's internal, external, was a way of doing that. But the policy was written in such a way that we didn't have that flexibility. So this is a little bit of flexibility on your side of the equation, where something that's deemed strategic as per council approval, and that would provide us that opportunity. So that's where we were trying to make sure that the policy is written is flexible for both sides of the equation.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions, Council? Okay, seeing none. And I do appreciate, Kim, that you identified the motion from Audit Committee, that it received a lot of support from Audit. So with that being said, do I have a mover for this recommendation? Moved by Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Roach. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So the next staff report is the Community Grants Renewal Updated Report, and I understand that staff have pulled that report from today because apparently the report that was Thank you. I understand that staff are pulling one of the policies from the report, and as such, it alters the recommendation to the one that you see on the screen. And with that being said, I'll turn to Travis. I gather you have a presentation for us.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me here today. It's actually my first presentation to council, so very exciting on my journey here at the City of Waterloo. So today I'll be providing a refresher on the Community Cash Grants Program and the Neighborhood Matching Fund. Then I'll follow that up with an overview of our proposal for a new grant program, of course deferring the arts part of that until the future. So Community Cash Grants is a single fund with 4 distinct streams: neighborhoods, sports and recreation, arts and culture, and festivals and events. And each year, $100,000 is distributed to community-based groups from those focus areas to help with operating and project-related costs to maximize community benefit. And this whole process is overseen by a council-appointed committee of up to 7 members and 1 council liaison. And this committee is responsible for reviewing the applications, approving them, and deciding the amount of funding to be assigned to an application. And the Neighborhood Matching Fund is a separate fund that helps support neighborhood-based initiatives. The big difference here between the two grants is this one has a component where the city matches contributions from the community, and this is not necessarily just financial. It could be value in kind services like volunteer time and such. And it currently sees a $50,000 funding envelope that's awarded each year to different groups. So here's what community cash grants look like in 2023. It's pretty typical for each year, like the breakdown of funding. You'll notice that there is not a neighborhoods portion to the pie. The neighborhood section of community cash grants is typically used by organizations that aren't affiliated with the city. So the Neighborhood Matching Fund is the normal avenue that they take on that. So while that mechanism is there, it's not used as frequently as the other ones. So while the amount distributed was pretty typical for every other year, one big change we saw was an increase in applications that were not eligible to receive funding. So you'll see 35 applications were eligible and 17 weren't. So we're almost sitting at 50% there, and like typically it would be probably around 5. So that's quite the increase, and one that we've kind of determined was due to a lack of clarity in the policy and regarding eligibility. So, well, that's one challenge we face, the high number of ineligible applications. There are also a few others. So, for example, there's a high volume of applications to review in a rather short period of time. So you have this one committee that's reviewing all applications across all the different streams. So it leads to a couple of nights of deliberation that can run quite long. There's no allocated budget to any one sector. So you have this $100,000 general pot of money that's distributed by the committee. So they're making the decisions basically of where the city's investing its funds. And often committee members don't have the sector knowledge of every sector, and that's no one's fault. It's difficult to find volunteers who know a lot about 4 different sectors. So someone who might be an expert in sports and recreation might not know as much about arts and cultures, and vice versa. So when you look at all these issues, they appear to be indicative of trying to make a single umbrella policy work when differentiation might be the better approach. So our proposed approach would see the streams within the community cash grants program separated into individual grant funds. So essentially we're taking the streams from within that big umbrella, breaking them apart and making them standalone. We're moving from a one-size-fits-all policy to a tailored and focused suite of grant funds. And each grant fund, one for neighbors, one for sports and recreation, and one for arts, would have its own staff-appointed committee, application intake approach, and funding envelope. It's similar to the grant program used by our neighbors in Kitchener and can easily be replicated in the future if council ever wanted to create further grant programs in different subject areas. It would be relatively easy to do so. You wouldn't have to edit any policies that are already out there. You can take the best parts of, or most applicable parts of each and apply them to a new grant. So this is just a simple breakdown of the different grants. So in the yellow column there, you'll see the community cash grants program, and that's currently what's in place there. And then the 3 on the right are what it's going to what it could transform into. So you'll see that the committees are smaller. They're all staff appointed, and the staff role changes in this scenario. So currently, they can just advise the review committee, but in this case, they would actually get voting power to contribute as well. And you'll notice there's slight differences in the intake periods. This was decided by each program area to suit the needs of each of their sectors. So like for sports, you typically have the 2 main seasons of summer and winter with some overlap into spring and fall, but 2 main periods would work better for that. Neighborhoods decided 3 would work better, and the arts team determined that the current system of 1 intake period per year works for their sector. So our request to council is as followed. We're asking that council repeal the community cash grants policy and neighborhood matching fund policy and replace these policies with 3 new ones. For sports and recreation, neighborhoods, and arts. And as discussed, the decision for arts would be deferred to a later period due to an issue we had with version control with the version that was sent to council. Neighborhood matching fund would just be rolled into the neighborhood grants policy. It's been really difficult to kind of oversee that matching fund of it, like determining how you match in-kind contributions. And it's just a bar that's not really existent in the other policies. So we're really looking for consistency and flexibility here. So we would also see the Community Grants Committee dissolved at the end of this year, and 3 new committees be created, 1 for each of the grant streams, and it would also require financial authority to be delegated to the new committees so they can review and approve the applications. So we're hoping for better clarity by having specific criteria for each grant and more flexibility by ensuring each grant is designed for its intended community. Moving to specialized staff-appointed review committees for each allows for a faster appointment process and one that would draw from the expertise of our communities in each area. The idea here is that staff have very close connections to the different organizations in the community. They manage these stakeholder relationships, and so that they'd be well positioned to draw from the expertise of each to populate the committees. Another benefit to this change would be council will be able to assign budgets to each funding stream. If, let's say we had a bunch of applications to sports and recreation and we needed a funding top-up, council could make that decision. While in the current system, you can only top up the entire community cash grants fund, and it's more difficult to tailor that funding. And we think this is a shift that will make better opportunities for residents to stay active, indulge in the arts, or bring their neighborhoods to life. It should see a better return on investment for the city, and that return is community benefit. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Question, Councilor Vasic.
Thanks through you, Chair. I think this sounds like a great direction. As far as I can tell from Arts and Culture Committee last time, we already do this. So there's the Public Arts Committee that kind of is a subset of the advisory. And I think that works pretty well with the subject matter experts being able to speak to it. So thanks for pulling this all together, even though I know we're not voting on arts and culture this time. I was just using it as an example. Because it is a new policy, though, and I do understand that we're going to be getting reports like we do now with who was awarded the grants. Is there, or could there be a mechanism for reporting back on how this new policy change is going operationally, just so we have a sense of whether we've made the right decision, the wrong decision, or just a fine decision?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. I think we can absolutely do that. I mean, there are seldom opportunities to properly review policies that are implemented, just because there's usually need to move on to the next project, so resources usually aren't allocated. But I think that'd be the perfect opportunity to kind of include, especially in that first year, an update on how everything went and kind of like a transition document to kind of provide that overview and just package it all up with the funding amounts that you would receive anyway. So I think it fits in pretty well and could serve that purpose.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not thinking of anything too onerous. I was thinking with the amounts that people receive, and even if it's just a page or two, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vasic. And Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair Freeman. Thank you, staff, for the report. Trevor, you've done a great job pulling all of it together. Having been the council liaison for my previous term and this current term on this particular committee, I do think this is the right direction to go. It has been members of the public that have been part of the committee have done a yeoman's job learning about arts if they're not familiar with arts, learning about neighborhoods if they're not familiar with art with neighborhoods, and haven't helped them if they don't know about sports. They've learned about a lot of sports. So I think it is a good opportunity for us to move in that direction. And I think the clarity that you're starting to put into place and having the expertise that's there to help. Just a caution with the policies and a request, I guess. We're not consistent all the way through in each of the policies around the committees. I'd like to see that the committees be described exactly the same way. If there are staff from finance, if there are 3 members of the public, 4 members of the public, just articulate that. It's not a showstopper for this, but just to be consistent all the way across. A little concerned about only 3 in the sports area, and I'll put my bias out there right now, that whether that's going to be enough just because of the different types and new sports that we have coming on, that even 3 aren't going to be able to be experts in all areas. So just something to think about as we unroll it. It will, I think, be good, to Councillor Vasick's point, to be able to track and see how this new policy, if we get an additional amount of applications that come forward, or and just the satisfaction of the whole process. I think it will be very good. I'm curious how we're going to be looking and monitoring. Still a bit confusing. What's a capital project? What's an equipment purchase? And what's an operating grant? So any thoughts on that, or guidance that you're going to be giving to those that are applying?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. Thank you for your question. So the main differences there would be, it's mostly operating or projects. So within those 2 envelopes, you could have related capital purchases like equipment. So if it was pertaining to like a specific project and time limited, then it would fit under that. But if it's something that you would use ongoing, like let's say a hockey team buying goalie equipment to lend out to team members and stuff like that, then that could still fit under operating, I think, and continue going there. So in the policy, we have it specified, like the types of equipment that can be bought, some of the parameters around using it, because what had stopped this from happening earlier was just like the concern around, okay, so you got a grant fund, you bought some equipment or something capital, what happens next? Do you hang on to it in perpetuity? If you get rid of it, do you sell it, do you get the money back? So that's why we determined that it has to stay in the possession of the organization. It cannot be resold or anything like that. So that's kind of the change on the approach here, but it would really be on a case-by-case basis that we would advise, but typically capital could be under either one of those.
Either one. Okay, great. Thank you for that. And just for my council colleagues, staff have really done a great job, I think, in listening to what the committee has said, and also listening to what the applicants have said in terms of clarity around our process and what's eligible, what's not eligible. So I look forward to seeing this unroll. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions, council? I'm just gonna, go ahead. Councillor Rowe, go ahead.
Through you, Chair. Thank you so much for your presentation. This is just for my clarification, and I don't know that you can speak to this because we've pulled the arts grant, but I'm just curious about the festivals and events, because I saw that it was mentioned, but I didn't see a lot of it in there. So I was just curious where that placement is and how that's going to look.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. So instead of having a specific funding envelope for festivals and events, it would more be about like what type of festival and event it is. So if it's an arts-based one, they would apply through the arts grant. If it was some sort of sporting festival, they might be able to apply through the sports grant. And if it has to do with the neighborhood, they go from that. So instead of being like what the event is, it's more like what type of event it is.
A follow-up question. Thank you for that. So my question then becomes, what about a cultural event or festival that perhaps doesn't align directly with arts, for example? Where would that fall, and how would that funding, is that funding available?
Under this model, the city would have to decide if they want to make a grant for that sort of stuff. So we've separated it based on the expertise of each of our internal areas. So if one of the teams in the city wanted to make that grant, we have it set up so it could easily be replicated and put into place if council willed it.
So if a group came forward and wanted to apply for that grant, how would they understand how to do that? Like if they approach the grants in terms of applying, how would that be clear to them?
So right now, like a lot of the ineligible applications had kind of dealt with that issue. And maybe I should defer to Estero on this one to be more clear, but go ahead, thanks.
Through the chair to Councillor Rowe. At the moment, groups applying for cultural events have always been a challenge for staff to evaluate. So what we would do moving forward is those organizations would have an opportunity to speak with staff. Staff would work with the group to figure out if there was a good fit with any of the existing programs. And if there wasn't, we would recommend other avenues of funding that might be open to them. So for example, the region has a new funding program that might be a better fit. So I think part of the change that we are recommending is to really help find a better fit for some of those activities.
Thank you. I feel from my own experience that this might be a bit of a gap. Initial read, I noticed immediately that that wasn't a pathway. So it's just something to consider.
Thank you. Mayor McCabe, did you want to speak to this too, or? Okay, so I just wanted to say to staff that this is another transition, shall we say, in the cash grants program, which I appreciate. If you might recall, when I started in 2006, it was a bun fight between council members. So there was a list of all of the grants, and basically every council member came with their chips and decided who was going to throw in the most behind which organizations, and that's who got the money. And it was awful, just absolutely awful. And I see Betty Ann smiling because she remembers how awful that was. And so I just think we've come so far, and this seems like the next rational step to take, shall we say, in terms of considering how we allocate these resources in a way that helps make it clear to those that are applying and helps kind of comparing similar groups against each other, shall we say. So I realize that to create new policies takes a tremendous amount of time, so I wanted to thank everyone who's been working on this for that work. With that, Council, we have a revised recommendation. Can I trouble clerks to just put that up on the screen? So it's there for you. So we're approving the report with the exception that we're deferring the arts grant policy approval because I guess they want council to have a different report to look at for that one and the citizens more broadly. So with that being said, do I have a mover? Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Wright. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we're on to the next staff report, which is the 2022 year-end capital report. And I just wanted to bring to council's attention because I haven't been checking my email messages as I've been chairing. And when we did have the comment, when we had the delegation earlier with Kay around the carbon budgeting, the CAO reminded me that in our budget strategy report coming later today, there is a line item related to carbon budgeting. So in addition to what we said, what I had said and what the mayor had said, and it is on our radar. So that was the one thing. And also with regard to the green building funding, I received an email from Kevin Van Uden. I'm not going to get it right. But Kevin in our IPPW team to say that the Waterloo Public Library is on the front cover of the Canadian Consulting Engineer magazine with regard to the low carbon heating or the solar wall that's on the front of that building. So just again, a reminder that kind of ties into that staff report. So yeah, I thought I'd share that since people sent it my way with some intention of it to be with that staff report. So yeah, we're on to the 2022 year-end capital report. There is no presentation on this piece. Does council have any questions? Staff are here for questions. Okay, seeing none, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Vasek, seconded by Councillor Rowe. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next item is economic development. Like we're basically moving into fees and charges for all of the groups. So the first one is Economic Development Division 2024 to 2026 fees and charges. Sorry, did I miss something? Oh, the budget strategy. Oh my gosh, I just spoke to that and I looked right over it, honestly. And Brad's like thinking that all the time we spend together on weekly meetings to talk about these pieces that I don't pay attention. My sincere apology. Yes, so the next item is the budget strategy. And is there questions on the strategy, Council? Councillor Vasek.
Thanks through you, Chair. I was curious if we might be able to get the public consultation results are due to come the same day as the budget approval. So curious if we could get them the week before so we have some time to digest.
Through you, Chair Freeman, thanks for the question, Councillor Vasek. And we did talk about this in advance, so I appreciate that. Yeah, the report speaks to the public engagement results coming on February 12th, which would be budget approval day. And staff fully appreciate that having the results in advance would be very helpful. So I worked with Carrie in communications, and we've confirmed that we will bring those results on February 5th, so 1 week in advance. So council has the results in advance of making final budget decisions. So the hybrid budget event that we held in 2023 for the first time is planned in early January, and then the survey will open the day after budget release on February 12th and be open for 4 weeks. So February 5th just gives staff a little bit of time to pull all that together, but also appreciate that council getting that in advance. So we'll move that up by 1 week to February 5th.
Thanks so much.
Councillor Bodley.
Thank you through you, Chair Freeman. Given the fact that we still don't have Bill 23 regulations, I'm wondering if staff could speak to the potential financial. We already know we have a 10-point adaptation plan to Bill 23, and there's some sort of scary numbers in there in terms of what that might mean. How, if the Bill 23 regs come out in the process of this 3-year budget that we're approving, are we going to be able to adapt to that in terms of our budget? And if not, how confident or what do staff feel about our ability to adapt through the next 3 years as the Bill 23 regs do come forward to the province, from the province?
Through you, Chair Freeman. Very good question, Councillor Bodley. So that is touched on in a high level on page 104 of the packet. So from the development charge bylaw, the capital side of the equation, so without the regulations and still some significant unknowns, what's proposed there is that we continue to rely on the current DC bylaw for the 3-year capital budget and 7-year forecast. With an acknowledgement that staff are reviewing this on a year-to-year basis, and we may be looking to open up a portion of the capital budget from a DC perspective within that 3-year window. We've done things like that in the past in terms of doing a bit of a limited capital update from a DC perspective, so we're very confident in our ability to do that. But then there's also operating pressures in regards to Bill 23, but also Bill 109 and other legislation. And there will be a report coming to Council next week, June 26th, that will touch on some of that. And staff are looking to factor that into the 3-year operating component. So, we don't have the full regulations, but we also have a pretty good handle on what some of those impacts are, both from a capital and operating perspective. So that's how we're handling it at this point in time. But the multi-year budget, while it does provide a good runway for 3 years, it is flexible, that we can make changes as needed if we do see things deviating materially in importance with the policy. So from a policy perspective, 1% is what would trigger us opening the budget midstream. But ultimately, if it was something that we felt couldn't wait, we would always bring that to council, and we have the ability to make adjustments when we bring forward the annual reconfirmation reports each December. So I think we have a good handle on where that's headed and plans for both op and cap at this time.
Further questions? Mayor McCabe?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Freeman. Just wondered, and it may be a question more for Sandy Little around how the budget timeline with the consultations with the implementation aspects of the strategic plan that will be. I know we're going to be launching. We're approving it hopefully next Monday, and then looking to launch it in September. And then just wondering if you could comment, either of you, on how we're going to make sure that that's clear to the public, how all that's being integrated into the budget.
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor. That's a really good question because there's a lot of moving parts and we want to make sure that they're all kind of coordinated together. So already this week we have a meeting scheduled both with our Director of Financial Planning as well as our Acting Director of Corporate Communications, just to discuss the strategic plan, and I appreciate the optimism that it will be approved next Monday, to discuss the strategic plan as well as our 3-year budget process in addition to our business planning processes. So all of these processes, we want to make sure they're all really well aligned. But you're right in terms of the timing of the implementation of the strat plan. How does that work with budget? So we're going to be in regular communication, the three of us, to ensure that all the processes are aligned, that when the business planning process kicks off this fall and the ongoing budget process, making sure that we're all really aligned in terms of what we're seeing through the strat plan, as well as what we'll be seeing through the business planning process. Fortunately, I am a member of the budget committee, so I've been in close communication with Brad in terms of what we're already seeing as part of the draft, what we're going to be seeing as part of the final, which we won't be releasing quite yet. So just rest assured that all those processes, we recognize that it's really important that they're all interconnected. They're not individual processes, and we want to make sure that we strengthen those connections with all three so that they're all really well aligned moving forward.
Thank you very much. And that's really where my headspace was just to make sure that it's obviously clear internally to staff and council, but also externally to the community, because we know we've spent a lot of time, particularly you, Sandy, and staff in Sanjay's office have spent a lot of time doing some really robust community engagement. So just want to make sure that that is clear to them what our process is and where we stand now. We already have approved a few things that are going to go into the 2024-2026 budget, and just so that the community is as clear as possible on kind of where we're at now and where we're going. Thank you.
Further questions, Council? Seeing none, there's a recommendation. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Bassick, seconded by Councillor Rowe. All those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, I think I'm right now when I say we're on to fees and charges. And the first one up is the Economic Development Division, and the report's been prepared by Estero and Justin, and it's in your package. Does anyone have any questions for the ECDev team? Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through you, Chair Freeman. Just wanted to highlight that in other communities, there's been some conversation around approval times and the burden, how burdensome some of the regulations on sidewalk patios have been in their communities. And I note that in the report, we are proposing that we hold the relatively modest fee for reviewing these applications. And I'm just hoping that you might be able to provide us with some feedback on the program from the City of Waterloo's perspective, in terms of feedback from businesses, how popular it's been, have we denied businesses, and I guess just broadly, given that we're being asked to approve the fees and charges, is the fee seen as a barrier to folks applying?
So through you to Councillor Bodley, the program has been fairly popular and it's been very consistent pretty much since the onset. Obviously, during the pandemic, there was a little bit of a slowdown in terms of the uptake with respect to the patios, but we're consistently 9-10 per year. The feedback is that that if the fee, because the fee is fully discounted at this point, so if the fee was put in place, we might lose a couple, but we wouldn't lose all of them. So there would be, we expect a modest impact if we did kind of fully engage the fee, which we intend to do it in the near future. But so far, council, with everything that's been happening, has decided to continue with that fee reduction.
Thank you. Any other questions, council? Seeing none, may I have a mover for this report? Moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Rowe. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Mayor, I trust you are in favor of that. Yep. Great. So now we're on to corporate services, 2024 to 26. The report's prepared by Paul Hedinga and Angela Schneider. Any questions for staff? Seeing none, may I seek a mover? Moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Bodley. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Community services fees and charges, prepared by Nina and seconded by Marcel. Emily, any questions? Seeing none, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Vasek. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next report is IPPW fees and charges. The report prepared by Ron Armson and Michael. May I ask if there's any questions on these? Seeing none, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by, I'm sorry, I'm looking right at Councillor Roach and I say Rowe. There's too many R's there. It's moved by Councillor Roach, seconded by Councillor Wright. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Sorry about that. I guess I'm feeling like the old mother who gets all of her family members mixed up. So when I start calling people by my dog's names, that's when you can just take me out. I'm on staff report number I, the 2024 parking rates. The report's prepared by Julie and Christine. Any comments? Councillor Bodley.
Thank you to you, Chair Freeman. As I review the parking report, I'm wondering if staff can provide us with a status update on the motion that was passed in the previous council about reviewing the implementation of paid on-street parking in the Northdale neighborhood, and if staff can provide us with any considerations as to what that might, how that may impact our parking reserve going forward.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Bodley, Transportation has provided an update that they're working with contractors right now to paint the on-street lines. I believe they're also working on the 15-minute drop-off zones. Staff have not started on recommendation number D yet. With respect to the parking reserve, it was the intention of the Northdale report when it was brought forward that any surplus revenue from that program would be directed towards active transportation initiatives in that neighborhood. So it would not impact the parking reserve.
Any other questions for this report, staff? Questions to staff on the report. I am really tired, I guess. Seeing none, may I have someone move the motion? Moved by Councillor Bodley, seconded by Councillor Hanmer. All those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. We are now on to item J, the consideration of the Carnegie Library as a future location for the City of Waterloo Museum. There's a recommendation in your report. I see that Karen Vandenbrink is here if we have any questions. Any questions, Council? Councillor Bodley.
Sorry. Through you, Chair Freeman. Karen, I'm wondering if you could provide us with what the scope of consideration might be for the utilization of the building. Is it just going to be is the sort of feasibility study just related to the museum itself, or is it possible that we might be looking at any other potential partnerships with other city needs? And I think specifically about the future of the visitor center, the necessity for storage space for our neighborhoods teams, things that have come up to council in the past. I'm wondering if those are periphery to the feasibility study, but maybe something that we might look at as we progress down this path.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor. At this point, the scope is to just examine the Carnegie Library for the museum based on our current usage requirements and for the future. So at this point, we're looking at it to allow us to expand our programming services and also to optimize the property for museum use. However, that isn't to say that at some point in the future, depending on what the assessment provides for us, in terms of space and meeting the museum's requirements, that we wouldn't, look outward at some point to some of those items that you identified.
Councillor Vasek.
Thanks. My question is about the Municipal Heritage Committee and if they've been involved to date on any of the work around Carnegie Library, and if they would be involved as part of the feasibility study at any point.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. The Municipal Heritage Committee has done a review. There are some plans, upgrades for exterior components such as windows and also the addition of an elevator, in which they have approved and signed off on. And so should there be any other impacts identified in this assessment to the exterior, which forms the designation for the Carnegie Library, they definitely would be involved in those decisions and through the heritage permit process, which we have here.
Do you think they'd have any interest beyond sort of what they're legislated to do to just be part of the process, given sort of their potential level of interest in having a museum uptown? And just what's going on inside is also heritage-like as well in its operations. So just curious if it might just be something to bring to them regardless of exterior, or?
Absolutely. I at one time built heritage. I did oversee that component, and I know there is a lot of enthusiasm with the members of that committee, just in heritage in general. And absolutely, they certainly are a good ally and support. So for sure that consultation, or just even if this project moves forward, that we would then bring them in and share what the plans are for that space, and also to the impact for the McGregor-Albert Heritage Conservation District, which also that is kind of an anchor property for. I know that many residents that are there would also be very interested in what is going to come if this were to move forward once again.
Great, thank you.
Mayor McCabe.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just wondering, so if the study happens and it comes back and says that the site is, I don't know, irredeemable, or it's far more expensive than we were hoping or anticipating for retrofitting and renewing, are you looking at any other potential sites for a potential location for the museum? Like, are there other, or even a place where you could do a new build? And if this site proves to be a bit too expensive or cumbersome?
Through you, Chair, to the mayor. At this point, this is the vision when we did the 2015 public engagement was to see the museum back in the uptown. So at this point, given the fact that this property, and it has been a property of interest for the museum, is now available to us, we'll assess it first. And then if it doesn't work out, then I guess we keep hitting the pavement and keep looking at what other options that we might have. I know we've been working with Kevin and IPPW as to what some of those options would be for potential space for the museum. So at this point, the focus is on that particular property. And certainly we are keeping our ears open for other options that may present itself too.
And so we don't have another site potentially?
At this point, we don't have another site.
In the uptown or anywhere else?
No, we would continue to our operations within our current location.
Okay, and have we looked at, staying in the uptown area, what it might cost to build something versus fix the Carnegie Library?
We have not. We have not done a comparison of a new build versus the rehabilitation of the Carnegie building for our purposes.
Oh, is that something that we are going to consider, or is that off the table?
So once we do the feasibility study, then we'll have a clear idea of what those costs are, and then we would potentially then go into doing some analysis that way.
Okay, thank you. Have we set a ceiling for what a debt ceiling now to steal from the U.S. terms?
Perhaps I'll call on my good friend Brad to comment, if you don't mind.
Through you, Chair Freeman, to the mayor. So as outlined in the report, currently the city has a approved capital budget of approximately $4 million for work at the Carnegie Library. I think it's safe to say that based on some of the preliminary estimates we're hearing, that's probably not enough. We're thinking that the full cost of the project will be higher than that. At the same time, staff are kind of doing some work around some alternative funding options to help support the total project budget. So in particular, grants. We've been having some conversations with the federal government around grant opportunities. But if we're not able to secure additional funding through the form of grants, then the city would have a decision to make as to, how would we go about potentially financing the full scope of the project or looking at alternative options at council's direction. So what this report is asking to do is take a portion of the already approved funds and complete the feasibility study to give us a better handle on what it would look like in that space, what the costs would be, and are there any other benefits that you noted? Is there an opportunity for some of the storage space to be in the facility and stuff like that? Because that does then open up some other smaller funding opportunities, as the museum does have some funds for storage. So we could then envision seeing that being bundled part of the overall project. But what we're looking to do today is just get that feasibility study complete so we have a better handle on the full project scope and cost.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Maybe does the Carnegie Foundation still have, do they still exist and have funding capabilities to? Yeah, the Rockefellers. I don't. Thank you.
Any other questions, Council? Councilor Wright.
Through you, Chair, that just actually does bring up a point about how we fund initiatives like this. And when a museum is a completely standalone initiative, it often does, rely on philanthropic support. So I'm just curious whether you can give us some indication of whether that is a future pathway for us in terms of supporting an expansion of the museum, or let's say not expansion, but an optimization of the museum.
Through you, Chair Freeman, I will say we would certainly be open to that if there was someone who was interested in partnering or coming forward. I think at a smaller scale, we have done that on some of the recreation expansions and stuff of that nature. But we're talking smaller dollars than maybe what we would need to here. So I think the city would definitely be open to that. And I think I seen Jill Fleming back there, but Jill's team does do some of that work on the marketing and promotion type of avenue. So something we would certainly be open to if that opportunity presented itself.
Any other questions, Council? Seeing none, may I have a mover for this recommendation? Moved by Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Rowe. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. All right, we're on to item K, Facilities Infrastructure Replacement and Rehabilitation Needs 2023 Implementation Plan. Staff are here to answer questions. Any questions, Council? Seeing none, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Bodley, seconded by Councillor Roach. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Housing Accelerator Fund, City of Waterloo application. Michelle Lee is here to answer any questions. Any questions on this application, Council?
Just to comment.
Mayor McCabe?
Yeah, I don't know if but I'm, no, oh, okay, just happy to wait if people had questions about it. Just want to recognize that this is, I think, an important application and hopefully, and we'll do what we can, through some advocacy to work with our federal representative and federal partners to hopefully, cross our fingers that we'll be able to be approved for this funding. And just want to certainly thank Tim and some of the other staff and community partners who've been doing a lot of thinking around this. And this is a bit of an unusual approach for lower tier municipalities. But I think I think this is certainly something that's clearly shows that how serious we understand the housing challenges are, and the role that we can potentially play in providing a variety, more housing options, and again for people of every age, stage, ability, and income level. And so, I just again wanted to say thank you for the affordable housing report that came in March, but then also how that leads into and prepared us to be able to submit this application, assuming that council is going to approve this, but to put us, to well position us to be able to do this. So just wanted to say thank you for that, and thank you to other staff who've contributed to this.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, may I have a mover for this recommendation? Moved by Mayor McCabe, seconded by clerk's choice. Yeah. Councillor Hanmer. All in favor? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. So that brings us to our break, Council, and so everyone will see you back at 6:30.